everybody. This is Darren Redmond, and I want to wish everybody a happy Labor Day out there. And Labor Day really is kind of weird to me because we celebrate the people who work by loafing. That's what we're doing today. Basically, we're not working. But actually, two people that are. One is myself, but not nearly as hard as my guest today. Skip Echeverria is our guest. You know her from her dominant radio show with Philip on KMJ, Monday to Friday, afternoon drive. They are the alpha and the omega when it comes to afternoon drive on the radio. For somebody who's from Brooklyn and just mangles the English language, Echeverria and Teresi is tough for me to say. So that's always fun.
It's okay.
For me. That's always fun for me. So also a therapist, a professor, as somebody, and I say this with no hubris, with a master's degree in education, that's always amazing to me. And I want to actually touch a little bit upon how people like you and Kim Stevens, you dominate the airwaves and you're giving back, in the classroom. But Skip, thank you for being my guest today.
You're very, very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Well, I appreciate it. And, one question that a lot of our listeners and our viewers are just writing in and just pounding my door down is, what's the difference between a barn and a stable?
So I've often said that I was raised in a barn, but more accurately a stable. I grew up riding horses. And horses tend to be in a stable, whereas farm animals in a barn. Later, I spent a lot of time in barns with cattle. So
right.
Yeah, I mean, my earliest memories, probably 6 or 7, was running around, getting dirty, riding horses out at the stable where I grew up.
All kidding aside, that had to be a wonderful way of growing up.
It was a really special kind of moment in time. So, I think about it now and kind of the differences in the way people approach parenting and competition. And it was really special. It wasn't until I started working in rehabs that I realized what equine therapy was.
Yes.
And that we were basically growing up with like the most top level equine therapy, but we just called that like riding horses and taking care of them. So
right.
Interesting.
Well, it's not the same thing, but somewhat similar. C.S. Lewis used to always use that term. It's not the same, but somewhat similar. When I was practicing baseball as a kid, I ended up playing college football. We were calling it playing, but we didn't realize that we were, it was instruction and learning. And
right.
But that's wonderful. And so, are you still have an affinity for animals?
Oh, absolutely. If I had more time, I would ride horses more. I feel really comfortable in their presence, but it's a commitment. It's also gotten really expensive. So
sure.
I was fortunate that I had some cool people around, and the programs that I wrote in didn't require some of the top-notch training expense-wise. I had top-notch trainers, but it was different. Right. But now my animals are probably limited to, a couple of cats, and then my dog that I've become one of those people that like talks to my dog, in the morning, like you get up. Yeah. And then like, she's gotten very comfortable with being in our presence. She's a golden retriever. She makes hikes better.
That's a beautiful animal, a beautiful breed. My wife and I and our kids, we have a Sheltie.
Okay.
Which is a really nice dog because I like big dogs. Shelties are not, but my wife likes the smaller dogs, and so it was a nice meeting of the minds, and they're a herding animal. Except my dog really is a cat because it has an affinity for our cat and just models its behavior.
Does it ignore you? Does it ignore?
No.
Okay.
Well, no, because that no. But what it does, it waits for the cat to make the move. Let's go outside.
Okay.
Let's time to eat. And it's funny because the cat's actually younger than the dog by a couple of months. But it's wonderful watching them work. It's not a Gary Larson cartoon, but I'm going to tell you about my two animals real quick. So there's this one cartoon that showed a cat and a dog waiting for the owner to come into the house. And one said slave, and that was the cat thinking, and one said owner. And that's kind of what it's like.
Yeah, that's very accurate. Yeah.
I love them both, and my cat rules the house. So you have such an eclectic, and I use that term lovingly, background. I mean, you started in ag, and then you moved into therapy. Well, you moved into radio as an internship in radio, which I love radio. I'll get into that with therapy in a minute. And then you became a therapist and a teacher. Talk about that you sort of have an itchy foot for communicating.
Yeah. Yeah. When I think about it, some days my day starts with talking at 8 a.m. in the morning. And with the exception of maybe an hour here or some time there, I may be talking or engaging in conversation until 10 o'clock at night, which is a lot. Mm-hmm. So my background is agriculture because my dad, I'm first generation. My parents, my mom's no longer with us, but my dad kind of has that quintessential pull yourself up by the bootstraps American immigrant story, which is really profound. And I always thought that I would just go into agriculture because that's what he was doing. And so when I got to high school, I really loved FFA. I was doing 4-H prior to that, and it just kind of made sense to me. And then in college is where well, let me back up. I graduated high school when I was 12. I started high school when I was 12. I graduated when I was 16. And
still,
then,
wow.
Yeah.
So that's still a wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So I skipped a couple of grades. They were like, what do you think about moving up? So I started high school when I was 12, but it was kind of on the down low. Like people didn't know it. Cause I was tall enough and looked, normal enough. It didn't stand out.
You were Doogie Howser.
People would say that, but I always felt really super dumb when it came to science and math. So maybe people are my thing instead. But I started college at Fresno State in the ag program, and I really thought that's what I was going to do. But there was a rock radio station that I loved, and I really wanted to be an intern. But the thing was, you couldn't be an intern until you were 18 because sometimes the afternoon show had women with less than full clothing on. Mm-hmm. And so you had to be 18. So as soon as I turned 18, I got an internship working in promotions, and then I just really loved it. Like that's where I found kind of my people, because I felt included, but always on the out when I was that young and in high school. And then this whole big band of misfits kind of took me in, and I fell in love with it. And I started grad school at 19 in communication because I had switched my major, but I was thinking like, I'm never going to teach. What am I doing? Right. So I quit going to grad school and worked in radio for it was about 5 or 6 years before I went back to school.
And then what made you want to become a therapist? I know you had a boss that had to say, have a backup plan, but why therapy?
Yeah. Part of it was that I finally got into treatment in my early 20s for some of my own issues. Like looking back now, I know that I had, right, we're all there, right? You get, I know that I had chronic depression and anxiety. I also, if we're just being like really honest here, when I moved out of my parents' house, I lost a lot of weight. I was never like obese, but I was heavier. I was a heavier kid, like never felt particularly comfortable in my body. But I lost weight rather quickly in a 6-month period. And I was really good at it. And really the program that I did, it was all a healthy program, but I got kind of fixated, and it really kind of tapped into some of my OCPD traits. And so I became like a raging bulimic, and finally was at a doctor's appointment because I was super worried about my health and all this stuff. My mom was chronically sick for a really long time, was a kidney transplant patient, that kind of stuff. But long story short, I finally told my doctor what was going on. He was like, whoa, we gotta have you talk to somebody. So I talked to a really nice lady for a while who helped me kind of get my head straight with relation to my anxiety and depression at the time, my bulimia. And I got on some medication, and it kind of stabilized me. And then on a whim, one of my coworkers applied for the program, and I was like, I could be a therapist. And at that point, they didn't make you take the GRE. It was for some reason, you didn't have to take the GRE. And I was always like, I hated the SATs. I don't like, math, not my thing. So I applied absolutely on a whim for grad school. And I got in when I was pregnant with my first child. And,
nice.
And I needed a backup plan because I figured like I'll do radio, but how cool is like a rocker chick who's now married with a kid and all that kind of stuff. But I remember distinctly my therapist telling me that she said something like, is now really the time for you to go back to school if you're going to be a mom and stuff. And I was pissed. I was like,
you should be.
Right. And so I kind of hold on to that, like, how dare you? But it all worked out the way it needed to. And I went back to grad school and it was life-changing.
I had a similar well-meaning person, and we'll use that term a lot, I think, as we discussed, when I was playing college football for Brooklyn College, I mentioned. My senior year, I ended up taking a job and leaving school. And I had well-meaning people tell me, in my family, you'll never go back. Putting all this negativity in my brain. What are you doing? You're crazy, this and that. I'm like, well, I want to eat. I'm living on my own and I need to eat. And then long story short, I'm working at Dun & Bradstreet for a while. I'm doing some things. I decide one day, I'm married to my wife. We're married 26 years. And I decided to go back to school to get my undergraduate. The same people, Skip, who told me I was a nut for leaving school. What are you, a moron? You got a kid?
Yeah.
Just throwing that negativity at me, and in general. So I ended up going back, and then, like I mentioned to you off air, that I ended up going to get my master's and graduating with distinction. And why do we have so much of that in our life?
Well, I think, I was having that conversation with a friend of mine I saw over the weekend. She was my first friend in high school when I was 12. She was kind of a wild child too, like only girl in a family full of boys, like, and just kind of loud and boisterous. And I was this quiet, like kind of lost person, but was very successful when I did things. So, like the teachers and stuff loved having me around. People liked having me around because I would win or do well. But she just kind of was like that first person that liked me. And we were talking about, and now, she's in her 40s. I'm 39. And we catch up with each other. She lives out of state. And every time we see each other, we're just like, I'm so happy for you. I'm so happy you're doing well. Like, you doing well makes me happy. And,
yes.
And we can always connect. But I do think that, it's taken me some time to get there with other people. She and I just have a different relationship. But I think a lot of times, like, we're taught comparisons, particularly as women, to always be comparing ourselves to others. Are we doing it all right? And then the negativity is just an easy place to go, know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's easy. It just is.
Yeah.
But it's sad.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be that way. Like, I think everybody has opinions, and sometimes, people can be scared for you. Like, are you making the right choice? I went back and I got my master's in counseling, and like, well, what is that going to look like for you long-term? What is that going to look like for your well-being? Because sometimes people get into therapy because they've seen that it helps people. And then sometimes they get into it because they don't want to fix themselves, but they want to help other people. And I was the first person in my family to get my bachelor's, the first one to get my master's. But there was always this thing of like, when are you going to get a real job? So now I have a few real ones.
But that's also because of some of these predetermined generational ideas about what's a real job, what's not a real job. One thing that you and your on-air partner, Philip, do so well, and I'm sure works for you as a therapist, is you listen. See, a lot of times people love to play double dutch. They can't wait to get that point.
Yeah.
And no, you guys ponder and you listen. And I love absorbing that because it's a skill set. Did you always have that skill set, or did you learn it through something or other? Because you're a wonderful listener.
Well, thank you. I think that being a mature child is where some of that started, because I was always around older people. I think that, I I think it was modeled in some of my friendships and stuff. I think also when you're a kid, when you listen, you can like kind of eavesdrop and get like the adult take on things, you know, so you can get some of that information. But I learned a lot of my skills through being like a DJ, like, well, we were never playing actual, you know, music, but when I was doing rock radio, you listen to people, they want to talk to you, right? And you try to make it interesting. But also sometimes I'm a very introverted, awkward person. I just have a really good, I call it like my performance monkey mode.
Sure.
So listening allows you to kind of be there, be present, and then people feel like you're engaging.
Right. No, I get it. I get it.
And then I learned that more as I went to
I'm
school.
a husband, remember that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. I do tend to sometimes, though, because I talk so much, I realize I talk so much. So.
Yeah, and that's part of it. But I'm telling you, I think the brilliance of your show and is the listening. That it's not two people talking over each other, and it's not, you don't have this feeling there's a little red light under the desk that says, now it's time for you to talk.
Yeah.
And we both know that exists, especially on those talking head sports talk shows.
Does it really? I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Oh, wow.
Talk to our friend CG, he'll tell you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So without going into any specifics, has the variables that are bringing people to therapy changed in not just COVID, but over the last, say, 5 years? And is the stigma finally going away?
I'll start with the second question first.
Sure.
It's getting better.
Good.
I kind of love that I don't know what generation they're considered at this point, because I'm considered a geriatric millennial. They're not Gen Z. They might be the next, I don't know what they are. They are just like, I have issues, I go to therapy. Like there, you know, I love it. I love that there's some openness to that. Now there's still certain stigmas that are absolutely related. And I think it depends too on where you're living in the world and what you're doing for a living. And I do think that there's definitely stigmas related to males seeking therapy, and also like different people of color and how that works in communities. But overall, I think we're getting better. Back to where we were 5 years ago. So I've been doing this. I got my degree in 2011. I started my internship stuff in probably would have been about 2010. And I started at an inpatient treatment facility for women who had their kids removed from CPS. So they were trying to like be able to get their custody back of their children. So we've come a long way in, I think, understanding drug and alcohol treatment since then. And then also the impact of generational trauma, sexual violence, like all of those things, right? Moving forward. So just seeing, because that's where I got my first got my feet wet with recovery. Fast forward to about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe seven or eight, and you started to see, when Narcan first came out, right? There's a great documentary called Heroin with an E, like a female hero, that talks about, I think it was in Ohio where they were rolling this out, and EMS workers, firefighters and stuff were having a real hard time carrying Narcan. Why are you going to save a druggie? Why are you going to save a junkie?
Oh, yeah.
Right. And I remember I get chills thinking about it. She was a female fire captain, and she's like kind of telling them like, you're going to carry this with you. Fast forward 2 summers ago, I think it was, I worked with a man at a church in Clovis to do a free Narcan training. And now we've got billboards and we're talking about kids. So I think in a lot of ways.
And that man just had a baby, by the way.
He did.
Yes.
Did. He's so great.
He's he's the best. The absolute best.
And so fast forward, I think we've seen some real changes. Now, those changes didn't come into place. I'm speaking specifically with addiction right now, or substance use, but I'll get into the other in a minute. those things didn't start to take place until it started hitting middle America, middle class people.
And people that need suntan screen.
Yes. Right. If we're being frank, right.
Yes. I'll be Darren and Frank. How's that?
Yeah. That's funny because my dad's Frank. So is my uncle and both my grandpas, but they weren't related. Anyway. So, yeah, it wasn't until now. Right. So I have these kind of moments of, wow, how far we've come. But we, in the last 5 years, because the last 5 years I've been working primarily in private practice, lots of anxiety, lots of depression, lots of recovery, different levels of recovery too. I've worked with folks that are 100% sober. I've worked with folks that have transitioned off of methadone or off of pills onto Suboxone. I've worked with folks that have been on Vivitrol, gabapentin, like all those kind of things, with an eye towards kind of stepping down or harm reduction. That's forced me to really kind of change my perspective on what sobriety looks like, what recovery looks like, what substance use and abuse looks like. Then COVID happened, and now we are in a big old mess with a lot of people that developed substance use issues.
Oh, yeah.
And then if you get into behavioral issues, we can talk about things like arguments over online gambling, issues about being stuck on our phones all the time, issues related to like food, behavioral disorders that way. So it's changed a lot.
No, I get it. And if I may share a quick Narcan story.
Yeah.
I used to be executive director of a nonprofit. And 1 year, 2 years ago, it was Clovis Big Hat Days. And so I made this minimal, I'm a minimalist to maximize attention. So you had a bunch of people out there with these pop-ups. And alone. And then on Sunday, the wonderful people at Pink, those women are
those women are wonderful. Awesome. Yes, they're great.
Awesome people came to assist me. And my goal was to hand out 300 boxes of Narcan for free. And I bring that up, and the idea came from our mutual friend who just had a baby. So I'm out there, and I have to tell you, what do you say? My kid's a druggie? People are going to think that we have a drug problem. I'm not taking that stuff to my house. I had one person tell me, and by the way, the box is like this big.
Yeah, it's super. It looks like an inhaler box 100%. That you get from the pharmacy. Yeah.
I had one guy tell me, but I got to carry that all day while I'm here at the Clovis Big Hat Days. Yeah, and I bring all that up. It has changed. It has changed. I will tell you the story of, if I may. So there was this second generational kid, and he's with his dad. And his dad recently came into the country. Am I español poquito? Aprendí español, so I'm learning. So I'm trying to have this conversation with this gentleman. And he said, my boy's a good boy. He doesn't need this. He doesn't need. And I was just telling him, just talk to him. I get emotional still about this.
Yeah.
And he talked to his son. And he did what he said he was going to do. And his son said, I need this. And this father had his hands on his son's shoulders and mouthed the words, thank you, at that kind of thing. So that is changing.
Yeah.
That is changing. But there's still that stigma there.
Absolutely.
Things, but it's getting better. Here's a question, just to kind of like throw it out there because time's flying. When did it become standard operating procedure for a child who graduates high school to be able to pick a major that they want to spend the rest of their life pursuing at 18? And I'm going to use my daughter as an example, who's friends with our mutual friend. His daughter just started school. My daughter just graduated about a year ago. She changed her major 3 times, still got out in 4 years. She changed her major 3 times because she was figuring it all out. Why do we still do that, Skip? Why do we still tell kids, well, you got to pick a major? Why?
That's a great question, because then the belief is if they change their major, they're somehow flip-flopping, can't make up their mind, wasting time in school. I think there's a lot to be said about the way that we have presented education and this assumption that it needs to be, you know, K through 12, and then 12, you got to go to college and you got to figure it out. And then even, I mean, if I was in charge, I'd be like, everybody between their bachelor's degree and their master's has to go and live life. And then you come back.
Agreed.
Because you said yourself, like, you came back around, right? Mm-hmm. I came back years later and I had a different understanding of, one, how much I wanted to be there. And two, that if the end of the day, if I missed an assignment or I didn't get a perfect grade, it was not going to be the end of the world, because I understood what it was like to work. I understood what it was like to have a family. I understood all of those things. Whereas I think sometimes when we're pushing through, like, you're just going through the motions. So, you know, I struggle with that because schools do require you to pick a major, right? But how are you supposed to know? And I say that though, with kids at that same age going like, well, what's your plan? What are you going to do? You know, knowing that my own life has been a whole bunch of different things, but that it's just hard. It's hard.
And you must deal with that a lot when you see some of your patients. I mean, some of that stuff. I want to ask you a little bit about being a professor.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit. And by the way, I'm going to kind of make this a twofold question. I mentioned earlier, you, Ken Stevens, you look at our TA right now, Lisa Smith-King. There's some powerful, effective women. Sheriff Mims just retiring. I don't think Fresno gets enough understanding of the powerful place that women have in our society. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you, because it makes me happy to hear that and to recognize that, particularly not other women having to, but men saying it, right, without it being a threatening thing. I'm going to say this lovingly, but I think it's important for context. I was one of 6 girls. The joke was my dad always wanted a boy, right? And so there was always this, well, dad didn't get a boy, but he had 6 girls. He kept trying. And I get now that came from a loving place. But I also understand what that, and it's not just within that culture. I think we do that across the board with valuing boys over girls, or I just want a boy, and I'm guilty of it myself. But I think that kind of, and particularly I'll call it out in the agricultural community, the boy takes over the business, right? Because can the girl really do it? Maybe the girl gets married to a boy that can handle it, but there's a lot of like that going on. So growing up though, it wasn't that I was disrespected. Like I had lots of great women around me. In fact, I probably had more women role models than male role models. But I also, I don't know if it's, I just laughingly say if it's the Basque in me or if it's the fire from my mom's side of the family or what, like I see things that I perceive as an injustice and I want to fight and change that. I also just, it'll probably be the death of me, believe in the overall good of people. Some of them can be terrible, but I always have this belief that there's the possibility for good. And I gotta live that way. Otherwise, what's the point?
Listen, I'll be perfectly frank, no pun intended with you. I believe that too. I believe that no child is born evil. They learn it. So it's a learned behavior that you could deconstruct. Somewhere along the line. That's what I believe. I wanted to ask you, we'll get back to being a professional in a second, but before I forget, recently I had on the podcast, again for the first time, a young woman, Dawn Tyree, who was a child bride. And I want to ask you from a therapist perspective, just an opinion without knowing the details. So in 43 states, you can marry a child. There are certain states, California being one of them, there's no minimum age. So as long as a parent, and that parent, by the way, could be a meth head who owes people money, or could just be into pedophilia, whatever you call it, and sign that child away, the child has no recourse and has to marry and is having sex with this man. The amazing thing is, in her story, she married the man at 13, had 2 kids by 14.
Ugh.
But when she got rid of him and ran away at 16, she was considered a child and couldn't rent an apartment.
Yeah.
And I laugh because how horrible that is. It's
right.
My question to you is this. He brought her to restaurants. He brought her to dinner parties. He brought her to people's houses. And is this a Kitty Genovese case where people are just so afraid to say anything? To say, that's a child that you married. But they let him into into these places. Talk to me about that.
Okay. So as the mother now of two kids in early high school, girls, well, it's all, we have a blended family. That's horrifying to me. Do I think that there's a little of like turning a blind eye to it? Absolutely. Do I think that it should be allowed? No. And very rarely do I ever like have a hard edge line on there. And I want to understand too, that like there are different cultures that have different orientations towards this. But when we talk about like child brides, you're talking about back in the day when people didn't live as long, right? Like we're not living in Game of Thrones times or the American Revolution. I think that some of this though does have to do with, it's basically human trafficking. If somebody is signing off, human trafficking in some situations, in other situations. And look, I don't know if it's because they're caught up in drugs. I don't know if it's because they're caught up in threats. I don't know if it's because they're caught up in, this is the way we can, save the rest of the family, is you got to go do this for us. I don't know. I don't think people are property. I do know that much.
I agree.
But one of the things that bothers me, and this is actually something that we get into all the time on the air, is the double standard that comes from sexualizing children. I'll often get into it. You'll hear a story about a female teacher. Well, is she hot? And she hooked up with a younger male student. And it's like, hey buddy, like you're lucky, that kind of thing. Whereas if we flip that around, male teacher, young female, he's a pervert, all of that. Right. So I think that makes sense to this child bride thing, because I do think that we live in a culture that idealizes all things related to purity and youth. And people can argue that that's biology because women hit their prime earlier, blah, 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 blah. I actually got kind of corrected the other day because we were talking about this, and bear with me. I tell stories for a living.
Yes,
we were doing a story that women were putting their hair in pigtails, two braids, and tracking to see if they got more tips in the service industry. Care to give any guesses?
They did.
They did.
Yeah.
Why?
Because they looked younger and innocent and pure.
Right.
Yeah.
And men, whether on purpose or on accident, have been conditioned to think that that's somehow sexier.
Yeah.
Right. 100%. And so 100%, which, and here's where I got reprimanded. Well, I didn't get reprimanded. I got told like, whoa, we're not doing that. And I said, look, it's just science. The number one genre of adult films is barely legal. At least the 100%. Last time I looked it up.
100%.
And right. Which I know makes people feel really uncomfortable when I talk about it that frankly,
True
but
words.
Right. But what are we telling people that it's okay to sexualize it? Young girls, like we do that on the regular, right? Although now we're in this weird place where young girls have access to like makeup and tutorials so they can actually look older. And that could probably be confusing for some men.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
But developmentally, no way in the world is it okay. I would say 18, I mean, I've been divorced and remarried, but like, you know, like 18 is probably maybe too young too, but like, I mean, 16, 14, anything less, that's horrifying.
He was 33, she was 13.
That's disgusting.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
100%.
And to the point, and I don't tend to be judgmental, but like I was 12 and in high school. So I know what it's like to be around a bunch of hormonal people, right? And I mean, but even then, like I was super mature. I didn't like have any idea of that. Not until years later did I really realize like some of the repercussions of being that young around older people.
Right.
But yeah, everybody around him, I'll tell you that I wouldn't have been friends with him. I wouldn't have been friends with him. I wouldn't have had him around.
Oh, absolutely. That's my, my instantaneous reaction. And then when I think about it, it just cements it. Mm-hmm. So back before I let you go, so why did you want to teach?
So the funny thing is I never wanted to be a teacher. In fact, I mentioned that, I dropped out of grad school the first time around because I was thinking like, I can't even talk about what I'm learning to anybody who doesn't have a bachelor's. I'm not going to teach. But fast forward, I was given this opportunity because an addictions counseling class opened up at Fresno State, and there was a bit of a scramble to fill it. And little did I know that the professor in charge, the doctor in charge of that program, he thought of me because he knew I had worked in rehabs. And I was just floored because I did not think that I had it. I'd never taught. I'd been working in rehabs. I was working with a psychiatrist who specialized in kind of harm reduction, sobriety type stuff. And so sometimes some of my biggest steps forward have been completely on a whim of, okay, let's do it. It happened with going to grad school. It happened with taking this job at the radio station and flipping from music to news talk. And I fell in love with it because it's actually allows me to play into some of my entertainment side. Mm-hmm. I feel like I can engage people. I like to use a healthy amount of humor. I'm passionate about the material, and I don't have to do it every day, so I don't get burnt out. But right. I've taught addictions counseling. I've taught child and adolescent therapy. I've supervised students seeing their first clients. Mm-hmm. So where you're really kind of like teaching like baby therapists. And then now I teach, and it basically whenever Fresno State gives me something, I'm like, yep, I'll take it. I just started my 6th year, and over the weekend I did the addictions counseling class. I loved it. But I told them, you are going to leave here with more questions than you have answers. And I just want you to think about things differently.
And that's a good thing, by the way.
Well, and I wish that I love my educational experience, but I do think that I'm able to bring something different by working in the field, by having that background. And I just love it. Like it makes it really hard to teach at night though, because then I come home and I can't fall asleep.
Right.
But yeah, I really love it. And I don't know how long it'll last, but I'll keep doing it. And I'm really proud to be able to work at Fresno State, mm-hmm. where I went to school, and I love this community. And so it's just cool.
So I want to make a statement, if I may, mm-hmm. and sort of a question, and then a quick fun question, and then I'll let you go. Brave might be the wrong word, but I mean, I am a product of radio. When my parents went through the divorce, I was about 7, and I soothed myself with the radio. I had a little Superman radio and listened to AM talk and AM mm-hmm. Music, and then CBS 88 AM news, and it got me through it. And there's still a part of me that I'm of a certain age. I get a discount when I go to movies. That I still love to listen to the ball game on the radio, and I think that's wonderful. It's a wonderful way of communicating. I don't think it'll ever go away.
No, I don't think so either.
What you and Philip did, and this is just Darren talk, you changed the narrative of what's expected in Fresno in terms of what people will listen to. And I won't go into details. People can figure out what that means. And I love it because it's just, it charges me up to see that, because there's this underbelly of consciousness that exists that some people want to pretend does not.
Yeah.
You know, the same people, by the way, who stepped over people's necks to buy more toilet paper,
Right.
you know,
Right.
as they packed the back of their luxury car. You know, that's what I'll say. Um, so, do you ever feel a responsibility, or is it more just this is my truth, and without going into any detail, do you ever get initial pushback? You don't want to go that way. We're the expert. This is what the research shows us. I hope I was as vague as I possibly
yeah, no, you know what? Actually, Darren, I'm glad you asked that, because I probably have an existential crisis once a week.
I laugh because I get it.
Yeah. First of all, I was told when I was recruited, it'll be fun, you know, right. Which I did believe it would be a challenge. I love knowing, I love knowing as much as I do, while also not knowing anything, because everything is so different. But I entered this kind of radio at a very different time. It was December 2019. It has been nonstop since then. And going back to, I'm going to touch back on the question, how has therapy changed in the last 5 years? I have literally counseled clients through families having schisms over social and political issues, right. Which gives me an interesting take on the air. So fast forward to where we're at now, there's growing pains. I do feel supported by my immediate bosses and by my partner. Philip and I have developed a way, I think, to engage in dialogue that reflects we can be respectful of one another, you can be passionate and you can care, but you do not have to be mean. Right. I am so tired, exhausted of some of the behaviors of full-grown adults.
Me too.
And I'll have my moment, not on the air, not around right. anybody, where I'm just like, I can't, like, what are we doing? Would you do that with your child? Would you do that at your church? Would you do that to your boss? And the answer is, for some people, yes.
Yes.
And then that's called accountability and consequences. But I don't engage in the bickering on Twitter. Lots of people like to do that to drum stuff up. I feel like Philip and I do a really good job of questioning things, but being respectful and also having fun. Because at the end of the day, like, I don't want to be a bitter, pissed off, angry person. And if that day ever comes, I'll leave.
Well, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Because you need your sanity.
Yeah. But this town is awesome. There are people yes. here that are amazing. There are people here that if they would just speak up a little bit more, the loudmouths don't have to control the narrative of things.
Listen, I agree. And that voice is getting louder and louder. And it's very organic, which I like.
Right.
I'm a very organic kind of, I believe in that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, even in my little world, I don't get involved in politics at all, because I'll meet you where you are.
Yeah.
You know, sleeping in homeless shelters, and I don't mean this as woe is me. I'll tell you one thing: it's great to feed them. When I say them, the people who show up.
Yeah.
But you know what's even more important? When they wake up at 3:00 in the morning, and they're itching, and they're scratching their arms, and you know what's going on. You don't ask them, at least my opinion, why are you this way, or what are you jonesing for? No, we talked about the Mets, so we talk about whatever.
Right.
And it's not even that I'm trying to change the narrative. This is a human being.
Right.
I'm going to talk to you with respect. And then 30 minutes later, the conversation's over. We'll both go back to bed.
Right.
You know, and when my dad went through his alcoholism, part of his sobriety was once a month we would sleep in homeless shelters. and
Really?
just, yeah. And again, I don't mean that with any praise.
Yeah, no.
So it's so important, that you treat people with grace. What a great book by a gentleman named Philip Yancey is called "What's So Amazing About Grace." And grace is something that you give somebody without any reciprocity,
Right.
any expectation of reciprocity. It just is. So anyway, here's my final question, sort of a fun question. Explain to me skateboard salvage, and also what television show have you binge watched more than, say, 4 times?
Okay. All right. I want to touch back on your thing about grace, though. My challenge to people listening and to my clients and to people anybody is, one, to exercise grace to other people, but also to ourselves.
100%.
Because I think sometimes that's the only way we can continue to kind of get through all of this together. So Skateboard Salvage is a local nonprofit that I just kind of got connected with several years ago when I was doing morning radio. It was the ceramics teacher at a local high school. He was one of those cool teachers, right? Like you could tell, like he's like a cool dude. And he was working with someone else, and they would basically take busted up boards and salvage them, refurbish them, and then give them to kids, right, in the community. It's so awesome. The main guy that runs it is Rodney, but anyway, so this group of them, they would go out and get these busted up boards and salvage them. Well, then they started getting donations and putting together like new boards. I don't know how to skateboard, but like skateboarders are cool. So anyway, they've given away, I think, over 2,000 boards.
That's
boards and helmets and stuff. And they give them out in communities. They just go around and they just give kids like boards and helmets, and like to try and, give them something positive to put their time, effort, and energy into. And one of the things that they've been doing lately is they go into correctional facilities for youth and for adults, and they have like the inmates and stuff paint these boards, or they'll go to like community-based services with people who might have like mental disabilities, right? And they have them create a piece of art, and then they do these auctions and people buy them, and it raises money to buy more boards for more people. So I just love the artistic expression, because I'm not particularly artistic in that way. And I'm definitely can't skateboard, although maybe someday I'll learn, but I don't know how to fall very well.
Oh, I know how to fall.
I don't know how to fall with grace. Gracefully. Yeah. I will break something. Yes. But anyway, so they're great. They're online, and they like, I bought one board that has some jellyfish on it that like a lady in her 70s painted. And then another one that was like a kid who was like 17 and in juvie. So yeah, it's great.
That's great.
Shows that I've binged.
That you binge.
We watch. Okay, so my favorite show I could watch a million times is, it is the show known as Schitt's Creek, SCHITTS.
My wife loves that show. She's seen it run through 3 or 4 and still cries at the end.
It is my feel-good show. But in our house, we watch so many cooking shows. My husband's into food and cooking. We will sit down and watch Guy Fieri. Mm-hmm. We will watch Chef with I'm blanking on his name. He's the guy that also directed the Marvel movies, Jeff something or other. I'm totally blanking. And Roy Choi. But anyway, we watch a lot of food shows, because I don't know that I'll ever go and eat at all these places, but I'll think about it.
Of course. Yes.
Yeah.
I did that one time from a restaurant dives and drive-ins.
Yeah.
I was up in San Jose. I was like, I have to go here for that reason.
Mm-hmm.
So first off, I love Schitt's Creek. I have not watched it as much as I should. I'm a big Letterkenny fan, a Shorzy fan, same kind of humor, and I love SCTV. I'm that old, and that's what those guys are from. But my binge show is House. I've probably watched every episode about 9 times and still love the whole interaction, and that's just a fun show.
Yeah, I remember his name. It's Jon Favreau is his name.
Yeah, Jon Favreau,
does it.
Yes.
Yeah, I said Jeff, but all those shows, I can't. Darren, I can't even put those shows on. Like if SVU comes on, CSI SVU, I will melt into the couch and I'm not getting up again.
Oh, yeah.
So I have to like kind of like limit my exposure in those ways. But
Jon Favreau did this wonderful movie about food trucks before food trucks were a thing, and which was really, really good. But
yeah,
Skip, I want to thank you so much for being my guest today.
You're very welcome.
You're a wonderful asset to our community and an even better person. So thank you for being with me today.
Thank you so much.